Overall, ketamine has allowed some of my clients to have access to new ways of seeing things. The ketamine allows access to different parts of the brain that sometimes in traditional therapy, it takes a really long time to open those up or have them be considered as a possibility for healing and growth. All of those parts are actually just parts of ourselves. They're, dark and light being kind of sense of duality, but really darkness is really just the light is being blocked. It's not something that is to be feared or to be run from, but really something to understand and open up to.
Shannon, thank you so much for being here and for joining me today.
Happy to be here with you.
Yeah, we've known each other for several years through the Barbara Brennan School of Healing. You have your own practice as a social worker and energy healer, and I'm so excited to dive in. I'm just going to dive right in. So, last time we spoke, we talked about how transformation often happens during our darkest times. That was something that you had mentioned, and I kind of want to dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a really great place to start, Stacey. And overall, I think in order to give context to that, it's helpful to orient ourselves to kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about self and growth and what is doing the work. What does that mean? And kind of in my personal journey and in my experience with working with others, it feels like where kind of our spiritual growth, our healing journey is a call back to self. It's a call to rediscover the parts of ourselves that are most alive, that are aligned. Some would say kind of our divine self, our core essence. And along the way, we lose sight of that. It gets covered up in different ways. It's always there though. It's calling to us. It's what inspires us to do the work and to reach out and try to grow and learn and heal. Coming back to the self, I think, is always what's calling to us. And it's the journey that many people are taking in therapy sessions and healing journeys, when we're diving in and trying to do the work on ourselves. And I think what we find when we're on this journey is there are things that we have created in this lifetime that end up being kind of blocks to being able to have access to that part of ourselves. And we might see those as the shadow parts, the dark parts. And those are the parts we often stumble through. We stumble around in, we try to find our way out of. Often we try to run from. How I like to contextualize that piece is like all of those parts are actually just parts of ourselves. They're dark and light being kind of sense of duality, but really darkness is really just the light is being blocked. It's not something that is to be feared or to be run from, but really something to understand and open up to, so that in the understanding, um, we get to allow that darkness to turn back into what it is. It gets to turn back into the light and into understanding and into our own truth.
If you don't mind sharing, maybe your personal journey of how you came to that understanding about coming back to the self and how dark times can actually help with healing.
I'm going to go maybe back to my 20s, even though I feel like I always felt a kind of a pull or a calling to greater understanding. But I think the first time I was consciously aware of being separated or kind of in a dark place was in my 20s, when I realized I no longer had access to kind of how I felt, my feelings. How do I feel about things? I would go there and look for it, and it was gone. It was
Can
like
you
a
say what was, sorry, can you say what was going on for you at that point? Was there some kind of life transition or?
um Not necessarily. At that point, I was married. I had a small child, kind of doing all the things that I wanted to do. I actually had a small business at the time as well. So feeling like on the outside, I was putting all the things in place that I wanted for myself, kind of checking off the boxes, if you will. Like, this is what I want to do. This is how I'm going to be happy. This is what my adult life is going to look like. And so in doing that, I was setting myself up to have this created life that felt like that which I desired and went out to create. Um, but not having access to myself, feelings, like I would even I think the sense that was most scary for me was that, like lacking the access to the feeling of love, either being received or given, knowing that it was there on a kind of mental cognitive level, but not being able to actively feel it. And there would be moments when I would get it. It would be like this rush of love. And I remember one time I was walking up the stairs and I felt it. And I actually like grabbed my chest and like fell against the wall. And I was like, oh, thank God. Like I knew it was there somewhere. Like I wish I had access to this. Um, so I feel like that's where I started looking at where am I? How do I get this back? Am I depressed? Is there something wrong
Can you
around?
talk a little bit about that moment of feeling it, and was something going on inside of you? What brought that? What
In those
brought the feeling?
moments, that would happen occasionally. It was almost just like flashes when I'd least expect it.
Huh.
Which is something I think that on a journey we come to know that sometimes insights or growth happen when we're actually not actively looking for it or requesting access to it. It's almost can come in the back door when we're a little bit calm and settled in ourselves. And
Mm.
so, but it reminded me that there is more. Like, what is that? How can I find my way to that? So really, that was kind of decades of like searching and looking, not just in that aspect. I remember one time I was had this longing, and it felt very lonely because to be able to talk about things that felt so vulnerable and things that I couldn't quite understand or express. But I remember being downstairs in my house and feeling this incredible longing to go home. It was like, I want to go home. And I
Hmm.
looked around at it, but I was home. And so I'm like, what does this mean? Like, what? It was just such a melancholy that came over. Like, there's a place for me, and there's somewhere I'm supposed to be or something I'm supposed to do, and this isn't it. Um, and that was upsetting. And I think that's something on when we're doing this journey, therapy work, healing work, it can feel lonely if we don't have people around us, if we don't have someone kind of in our corner who understands what's happening with us.
And what were you doing at that time? And you said you had a small business and a family, and that's when you had this longing to go home, to be somewhere else or do something else.
Yeah, it wasn't so much be somewhere else. It was more like to feel something else. Like the idea of being home and being completely where you need to be with security and love and access to everything that feels like it's grounding and everything that feels like I am fully supported and I'm supposed to be here and I'm wanted and I know where I'm going. Like all of those feelings of like, ooh, wanting just being cut off from that and feeling like wanting that so badly.
That sounds like something that pretty much every human would want.
Yeah, I think so.
There is an inside outside stream, right? That it's not just self and it's not just other.
I think that that is one of the greatest afflictions of us humans right now is this kind of core belief that everything we want and our fulfillment and our satisfaction comes from outside. We have to arrange our environment and everything outside of ourselves to be just right, and then we'll feel the way we need to feel. If I can arrange things and everything outside is such a way that I will feel love, that I will feel safe, that I will feel secure. And I think that's just a human tendency. It's what we've learned to do. We think that that's where the answers are. And then what happens when those things start falling apart or aren't showing up the way we had hoped? Then there's like this lack and there's this striving and this leaving ourselves. So like, I need to fix that. I need to build this so I can feel a certain way. And I think on a healing journey, what we slowly learn is to like turn around and actually bring that back inside and realize what we're seeking. In those moments when I was seeking home and I was seeking all those things, what I came to know is I was seeking connection with myself because all of those things the security, the sense of love, trust, all of that is actually something that we can cultivate internally. It's there for us all the time. It's actually the part in us that is like vibrating for us to see. It's that which is calling us to come back and find that within ourselves. And that's what, when we can realize that we set things up for ourselves, and it's almost like to fail when we say like I need this perfect family, or this is the job I need to have in order to feel happy, in order to feel fulfilled, in order to be okay in this world. Well, what happens when that doesn't work? And that sometimes does cause us to have those dark moments. We go into this dark place. I can't make my life work the way I want it to work. So that means we turn that in ourselves. It means I'm worthless. It means I can't be here. It means I'm going to be sad. It means I'm cut off from things that make me happy. And then, that work is turning around and like coming back home and realizing we are our own safe place to land. And that which we were seeking was actually inside of us all along. Um,
And how do we do that? I mean, sometimes, when some people hear the word coming back to self, working on the self, coming home to the self, there can be this sort of feeling that it's selfish, that, oh, you only care about yourself if you're being with yourself, so how would you address that? And also, what is meant by coming home to the self? Like, what are the actual steps?
yeah, great question. So also, so some context too, when I'm talking about self, I'm actually talking about self with a capital S is how I see it, as opposed to a little s, and meaning like self being ego self, which not being used in any kind of a negative way. Ego self being our personality, that which shows up in the world that we cultivate, that is our desires, our will, our personality is kind of our ego self. And sometimes we use that in a negative way, like when an ego is inflated and we think overly well of ourselves. We can use that word. And in this context, if I use that, it really just means our personality self, the self that usually we show to the world. And I use self with a lowercase s to kind of denote that. And so, one important contextualization is that when coming back to the self, we're not so much talking about the little self, like what does Shannon, the person, like? Oh, I love, bananas in the color blue. Well, that's fabulous. The coming back to the self with a capital S means finding what we are at our core essence, those core traits in ourselves that are the things that often cause us to seek outside. So that could be truth, security, love, peace, those core things which stay and remain no matter kind of the direction our personality takes.
Hmm. And what are some steps for experiencing those?
Yeah. There's so many different paths in on this journey, but it feels important to be able to mention a few different things. And what I would like to say about that is experiment with different things, or as you hear of different options that we may lay out here today, what resonates? There's often a resonance that we can feel inside ourselves when we're come upon something that's like that's for me right now. And so people are approaching their own work from all different levels and places and ideas. And so finding something that resonates, I think, is the most important. There's something that like, yes, I can do that. That feels right. It almost might bring a sense of relief, or like a feeling like, oh, thank goodness. And that's kind of what we're looking for when we're on a healing journey, like what's next for me and how do I bring this forward? So that could be sitting quietly. That could be kind of cultivating what I like to say, like a meditation practice, but sometimes that what meditation practices look like is quiet time, contemplation. And contemplation means like bringing questions like, what am I doing here? Like, what do I want to see happen? Like, what can I cultivate in my life and in my day to day that feels authentic and true to myself? It's really asking ourselves the question. So often we turn outward and we're asking the world, how do I need to be, what do I need to feel good? It's ask, bringing those questions and asking ourselves, what can I do to, and then trying those things. Try that, see how it feels. you know growing new parts of ourselves and changing is really a muscle that we have to like flex and practice and do. And sometimes it might feel awkward at first, almost like when we're doing a new exercise. Um, but it will often still feel good, almost like when we do a new exercise. And so it's something that can lead you forward and be open to what feels next. You know, a commitment to doing the work of finding the self is almost one of the first steps too. I'm going to sit in quiet, and even if I don't know what that means for myself, I'm committed to finding my path forward. And so I'm going to sit, I'm going to do some meditation, I'm going to be quiet, I'm going to seek out persons who the things that they're saying are resonating or bringing me new ideas. It could be podcasts, it could be books, it could be articles, something that brings you to that almost like next level of like, oh, there's something there for me. And again, that path is going to look different. So I'd hate to say like this is the path because everyone is so different that sometimes it feels winding. I know when I sit with my clients, I will say, you know what, I'm going to throw out a couple ideas here that are coming up for me, but I need to hear from you. What resonates? Like which of these feels good to you? And then let's take that and run with it. It's such an individual journey. Um, but the commitment to the journey and then being willing to shed the things that aren't working and grow new parts that will feel more aligned. And that's can feel kind of scary. That's why the support of others who are also doing work, whether it be professionally or even just, socially in a group, can feel so important. Because we stumble across parts of ourselves. It's like, oh, I didn't even know that was there. And it's things that sometimes we're afraid to look at, or it might be attitudes or ways we show up with people, or we're actually pretty mean and angry in the world in some of these aspects. And sometimes those are the things we don't want to look at in ourselves because no one
because
wants
they're uncomfortable, right? I was the whole
to.
time you're talking, I'm thinking, oh, this could be really uncomfortable because there's the resonance with something, right? And then there's the actual sitting with it, which can bring up a lot of discomfort. And so,
And that's where that darkness and that discomfort, but the discomfort usually means like, I don't want to look at that thing. But usually that's the exact thing we need to look at.
mm,
And with that awareness and being gentle with ourselves, what's there for me to see here? Sometimes the things in our external environment actually point to that. Like we think like, oh, I got the new job, so I'm excited, and my excitement and that life force energy is actually caused by getting that new job, where really that new job is kind of putting you in alignment with that, which is always there, that
mm,
feeling. The job didn't cause it, but it allowed you to align with that part in yourself that feels that way. Um,
mm,
because it removed a block of worry or am I going to get that job or the things that hold us away from feeling that are those kind of dark things that we work through, our fears, our worries, our um, kind of distrust in ourselves or our own process. And
mm,
yeah, what I have found to be an absolute truth is when we're on a healing journey and we bring sincerity and authenticity to like wanting to move forward and asking to like what do I need to know about what's next for me, and then being open to how that answer comes. It may not come in that moment. In fact, usually it does not. It comes around the sides, and it may come as a knowing, or somebody hands you a book like this book might be great. It can come in so many different ways of what's next for me, how do I grow. And so being willing, it's sometimes not an easy journey. And I know for my clients, sometimes I say that like sometimes this healing journey is like going to be the hardest thing you do, but it's the most worthwhile.
mm,
Um, and so following, once you're kind of have a sincere commitment to like the healing and the growth, next steps come forward. They reveal themselves, and it's different for everybody. And so, yeah, a willingness and openness to look at ourselves, and then do the hard work of like, if something doesn't feel good, be gentle. We all have an ego self that has aspects that are, things we don't want to talk about at parties. And those are the parts that hold us back. And so those, when those come to the light for ourselves, sometimes we want to run away. We want to hide from those. We don't want to talk about those parts. We don't want to see those parts. We don't want to admit those parts. But like sitting with that is where that uncomfortableness comes in. But knowing that bringing it up and sitting it with it doesn't mean it stays. Actually, shining a light on it is what allows it to start shifting and becoming something else. We can't change or shift something that we are unaware of or have been unwilling to bring into awareness. We can only work on the things that we're aware of. And so, on a healing journey, those things will sometimes float up, and sometimes it's like a layers to an onion. You'll kind of deal with something and you'll be like, oh, that was big. And then you might circle back around and that comes up again in a different context, or oh, this is the way I show up in this way, or you know, it gives us infinite possibilities to our life gives us infinite possibilities to like show up and like practice. Sometimes I feel like our life is kind of like a sandbox where we get to go and build and try and then retry and do again. Um,
Mm,
and
beautiful.
so
It
yeah.
is never ending journey, right?
A never-ending journey. That's really more and more delightful the further into it you get.
Hmm.
Because you can kind of see what's on the other side. Sometimes first going through those dark, heavy things, sometimes it feels like there isn't something on the other side. Um,
Hmm.
but there is. And that's where then once one kind of can get through that the first time and see it, it's where the full investment comes in because it's like, oh, there is something here. I see how this works. I
So it's
am
kind of getting through the resistance, right? And I find that for myself too, that on the other side of that resistance can be a lot of vulnerability, but it's in that kind of soft, vulnerable place where we can start to see the light.
absolutely that's vulnerable and authentic. That's where that bubble, that's where our true self is in that vulnerable, soft space on the other side of that, which is kind of hiding the light from us. And so we have to go through it if we want to get to the other side. And it's so worthwhile. Talking about it in terms of vibrational levels is helpful because those core qualities are vibrating at what we might call like a higher level. It's when we feel that lightness, that liftedness kind of connection. It could feel like happy. And so when we can tap into that in ourselves and kind of cultivate that feeling, we are also kind of reaching for the highest vibration we have available to us. And what we know is practiced vibrations do bring experiences, thoughts, ideas that are also at that vibration. And so, yeah, talking about it in terms of vibration is helpful for those who are kind of on, on that wavelength and where that makes sense. And almost like anything that we practice. So practicing a vibration helps us maintain that vibration. And we can go into our day at a different vibration. Um, One of the best things that I've found that helped me in my journey in terms of that is waking in the morning and reaching for the highest feeling thought that I could feel at that moment. And really like milking that thought and milking it until that feeling is in my body. And I'm just like, it's oozing out. And then going into my day and realizing that things tended to be gentler. The experiences tended, I was approaching them in a different space. So they occurred to me differently.
So it starts with the mind. Is that correct? Starts
Well,
with thoughts.
I think it could start in different places, Stacey, and I think the mind is an easily accessible one. We like logic, we like mind. So I think it can start in the mind. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the easiest way for people to take it. Um,
And can you share with us one of those yummy thoughts? It doesn't have to be your own personal one, but what might be an example that someone could reach for in the morning, especially if they're waking up not feeling great, not feeling in a good place.
Right. And even if, yeah, you think ahead and you think of your day and it's like, oh gosh, there's no way I'm going to make it through. So even just taking in this moment what's okay. Okay. These blankets are feeling so warm right now. I love that my head is resting on a soft pillow. I love the idea that I get 5 more minutes in this bed before I move into my day. I love knowing that I can take this time right now for myself to just breathe, that nothing has to happen right this moment. I'm going to luxuriate in this feeling that, like, right now, all is well. Nothing needs to be done. I love how warm this is. I love that I can be in this space and that just thinking like in the now, in that moment, what can you find to be completely grateful for? And that feels like, ooh, I would choose this experience. I would choose this. And then really thinking on that and letting that grow and cultivate till you actually feel it. So it can start in the mind with a thought. And we know that, our emotions and thus and our actions can follow from that, and we have access to our mentation, so it's a nice way to interject into our day.
But it is basically training the body to follow the mind. Is that correct? Sort of the feeling following the thought, or in any case, cultivating the feeling no matter what.
Yeah, cultivating the feeling, but sometimes our feelings could indicate that our thoughts are out of alignment. So sometimes
Mm.
it's the opposite way. So we might going into a situation and all of a sudden we feel a lot of anxiety and worry. And we might then use that as a clue. What is going on in my mind right now? What thoughts am I thinking that actually aren't in alignment with the highest truth I know?
Mm.
And and so let's say we're going in and we're going to have a meeting with something for work, and we're really worried about how it's going to go, and we're worried about our position, and we've got all this going in us. Um, and we can check in and be like, wow, where am I with that? What thoughts am I thinking that are actually pulling me out of alignment with that self, with the capital S, with that core that's vibrating like truth for us to feel. And so that could be, you know, realizing that my thoughts that, this guy's a jerk in my meeting and I'm worried about my job. What if I mess this up? For me, like the highest truth that I would have access to in those moments that I could come back to is that, like, actually all is well. I know that however this plays out is actually going to be exactly what needs to happen right now, and I'm going to be able to work through that. It may not be my preferred resolution, and I know that I'm going to be able to be okay with that no matter what happens. And so for me, like, that feels like truth. Like, can I hold that? And then
Mm.
that worry and anxiety actually goes away. So in that case, like, that your body clues and your emotions can clue you in that your thoughts are taking you somewhere that aren't for your highest good.
And that sounds like a lot of trust too. And, as when we're in alignment, then we can let go and trust that however things turn out is how they're
I
meant to
think
go. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think cultivating almost like a basic level of trust is something that happens in healing, a healing journey as well, as we learn to let go and then things are okay, even if okay isn't preferred or isn't what we would have chosen. Um, I think experience sometimes brings us that what happens next for us actually usually if we can hold the perspective that what's happening is going to bring to me exactly what I need in order to move to where I'm going, we can see that that is always the case, even if it's not preferred or it's not something we would have chosen.
Mm. Mm. And so circling back to your own experience of, having a young child, being married, and feeling that longing for home, can you talk a little bit about how you moved through that and where you are today? What outer circumstances maybe had to change, and how you found that home?
Yeah, I think over my 20s and 30s, I tried lots of different ways to find my way back home. I took a Reiki class, for instance, and knew, could feel that I couldn't feel things, and thought, I'm going to open myself up that way. I did lots of reading, yoga, meditation. I tried different religious paths, kind of organized religious paths, seeing if I could find some answers for myself there. Um, and ultimately, probably about 10 years ago, I think is when my journey really um, kind of amped up a little bit. I got to a point where I felt like I couldn't move. Everywhere I was up against myself and I couldn't move, up against things that didn't work anymore. And externally, my life was actually from the outside, it would look like it was functioning just fine. And I think that this is some like in my experience, when there's something that is ready to shift or that I need to see that's holding me back from kind of growing, it tends to come into my awareness and then it amplifies and almost seems to surround me until I can look nowhere else. And I don't think it has to be that way for everyone. For whatever reason, for me, it feels like I need it to be screaming at me, like this doesn't work. To you see, this doesn't work. And everywhere I look, I try to turn away or move away from it until I finally can't, and I have to look at that thing. Um, and so there was a lot of that in my 20s and 30s. Um, Also, it felt like a very lonely place as I would find some truths for myself, and I often would find truths through my readings. I would read kind of spiritual, kind of or new agey books that had new ideas in them. And for me, I could feel something was a truth for me. It would like resonate. I'd feel like a tuning fork. It'd be like zing, like this is
Mm.
something for you. And so then I would bring that concept to myself. What does that mean? How do I apply this? And at that time, it was a lonely journey because I felt like I was doing it on my own. Um, and sometimes I'd try to talk with people about what I was experiencing or these things, and not everyone could relate. So it was sometimes lonely and sometimes even detrimental. I know probably some of my darkest times, I was making some external changes that I think were hard for people in my life to see me making. And there was a lot of question like, are you okay? Like, do you need to see a psychiatrist and go on some medication? Like, what's wrong with you, kind of thing.
Mm.
Um, and if,
Do you feel like talking a little bit specifically about what some of those changes were and what you were doing at the time? Because I know you studied to become a social worker, and was this all happening at the same time?
so this was a little bit older. I think this was really when, um, for me, there were parts of myself that I had completely lost touch with
Mm.
and were cut off from. And what the internal battle that I feel like I was having is these parts were like clamoring to be heard. And I was kind of, the words I would use would be kind of imposing my will on it. Like, no, this is how life is supposed to be. This is what you're supposed to do. And that related to like being a mom. This is what a good mom means. This
Mm.
is what, you know, it means to be successful in this place where you're living and what that needs to look like as far as work, as far as marriage, as far
Mm.
as showing up as a mom. And so I had to actually break down some of those um, kind of concrete thinking about what it means. Like, I'm a good mom if.
Mm.
And I had to question those and those kinds of questions when we actually like turn towards and question some of the things that we thought we know are truths are really painful because you kind of sometimes you set up your whole life around these truths that you think are like, I'm going to, die on the hill for this one. Like, this is a truth. And then when you actually question that, I know one of the like my own personal mantra that has seen me through the last 10 years that has been incredibly helpful is in any given scenario, anytime you're thinking something, is just to ask, like, what else can be true?
Mm.
And often you will find there's other things that could be true. You may not want that to be true, or you may not actually believe it for yourself at the moment, but what else can be true? Um, and for me, that also allowed a bit of softening. um, around kind of my strong sense of like right and wrong or how I needed to show up.
Mm. And do you did you have moments where you, or do you want to talk maybe about clients who have, you know, you've seen through this kind of journey of, the darkness, the dark side of healing, meaning, coming up against big life obstacles and needing to get through them. And then what happens when people resist, when they don't want to face what's happening in their lives?
Yeah. Well, ultimately, I think when we're turning away or when I have a hard time switching gears for ourselves or considering other possibilities or other truths, it's just a deep level of fear of like the unknown or fear of change. And when we boil that down, we can often find like a sense of security or loss of self is at the base of our of fear, but it gets piled on. We don't even see it as fear. We see it as, well, I need this in order, this is what makes sense in my life. But what else can be true? What else can be true if we can kind of follow it back? It's fear that keeps us from moving forward or keeps us kind of cultivating these stories that hold us in place, because then um, it's kind of staving off the fear.
Mm,
And so that's why sometimes the journeys can feel dark and scary because when we when we question those stories that we've built around ourselves, we get in touch with that. It's scary. That's fear under there. Well, then what else? Like, what is it then? If I didn't know what this was, or like how to show up, or like who am I without my stories? Who am I without all of the things that I've learned and come to believe about life?
mm.
um
So it's questioning conventional wisdom in a way.
yeah,
Mm,
sometimes it can, sometimes it can be that. um and so in my clients, um and so I do regular counseling, but I also do ketamine assisted therapy.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, I wondered, uh, how much, what brings someone to, wanting ketamine assisted therapy? Is it when those obstacles just become too great emotionally, and they need some extra, or is it, how do you assess when someone's prepared for it?
Yeah. um In my experience, those that can get the most out of kind of a psychedelic assisted therapy are often people who've done a little bit of work already with themselves, meaning they've already have some tools in their toolbox as far as um, coping skills, cultivating self-awareness, um, on board and willing to let go of some things that they may think are true in order to grow and change. Um, but clients who are well suited, what ketamine does, what we know it does in the brain, is it actually allows us to consider new perspectives. It actually shifts the way neurotransmitters are kind of transferred and absorbed in the brain. And so old ways of thinking actually, when we have repetitive thoughts, or sometimes that can be um, even just our experience of what the world means or how we view the world. But when we're depressed or anxious or have trauma symptoms, those thoughts can sometimes take on a really strong experience where it's the same thought all the time. It's almost like wearing a, like I like to say, like a rut in the brain. Like when this comes up, this is what we think, this is what this means.
Mhm.
um, and what we know about ketamine, on a physiological level, is it actually allows new neuro passageways in the brain, so that instead of that rut being the only thought or the only way of thinking being available, it actually allows some new perspective and some new thought. Um, And in addition, it also has um, antidepressive tendencies. So depression tends to just lessen even with just the medicine, but using ketamine with therapy helps make use of that neuroplasticity that the medicine allows in the brain to like form new ways of thinking about things, taking new perspectives. That idea of what else can be true can take
Mm.
on a whole other meaning um, with the help of medicine. Those are some things we can do in therapy, but sometimes clients who feel like they've been pushing up against the same thing and can't get footing anymore, or are coming up against, um, some things in themselves that they've been working to shift and move and just can't. Sometimes that ketamine can be a boost to allow access. It's not a silver bullet. It's not something that will just uh, um, like a miracle, but it does allow some new perspectives, and then clients can do the work around what does that mean for me and how do I put this into play. Overall, ketamine has allowed some of my clients to have access to new ways of seeing things. And what that means in like a very practical way is trauma. I have several clients who are dealing with trauma from all kinds of different experiences in life, and parts of themselves have been shut down, kind of in a functional way at some point. Um, what we know about trauma is, our ego self will keep us safe. It's going to come into defense and shut different parts of ourselves down, so that we can essentially survive an intolerable scenario. And then sometimes those ways of being become kind of our the way we show up in the world, the way our thoughts work, and having access to some different perspective can allow that to open up a little bit. That rigid thinking that sometimes at one point could keep someone safe, or like rigid ways of being. Uh,
Mm. So it can kind of break a hypervigilance cycle.
Definitely hypervigilance cycle, a hopeless cycle, um,
Hmm.
a cycle of even like reliving or re-experiencing
Hmm.
um, a trauma.
So we're talking deep trauma. I mean, statistically, when the research I've done, I've seen that it's can be very helpful for people with early childhood abuse, whether it was physical sexual violence, people who've recovered from PTSD, from war zones. Have you found that those kinds of people come to you with the really deep trauma?
I have, yes, I've worked with some persons who have been struggling with really deep trauma,
Mhm.
and I feel that in all of the cases I've been privileged enough to work with, there has been growth and gains. That as being a therapist and having worked with trauma in other ways that were not assisted with the use of medicine, um, the ketamine allows access to different parts of the brain that sometimes in traditional therapy it takes a really long time to open those up, or
Mhm.
have them be considered as a possibility for healing and growth.
Mm.
So, but not only that, also persons, I've also had clients who just feel stuck in their kind of in their life in general. I'm feeling like I don't know how else to move forward. I've tried things and I can't find my way. Um, and kind of the creativity and perspective that ketamine allows new things to open up and new things to almost like clouds to clear sometimes of what was already there, uh,
Mm.
but was covered up.
And how many treatments does it typically take? I would,
So,
sorry, let's talk a little bit about what it even looks like. Is it a pill? Is it a liquid?
so the ketamine I work with is sublingual, so it's a fast dissolving tablet that a client will swish in their mouth. They hold kind of their spit in their mouth. They swish, so it gets absorbed through the mucus membranes in the mouth. And then they spit, so it doesn't ever actually get digested.
Oh.
Um, and that creates an experience, about a 70-minute um, experience that really inspires an internal experience. So, what that looks like is my clients will often lay back on my couch. They have music, they have headphones, and they kind of go into their own kind of quiet space. Um, I'm there and supporting that. Um, and it's about 60 to 70 minutes usually, and clients will then come out of the experience on their own and kind of be ready to, they'll remove their eye shades, and then we will talk about the experience if it's available at that point. Sometimes clients are kind of still staying with the internal experience. So sometimes there is less verbalization right after a ketamine session. But then the important piece that I offer that I feel is necessary is the therapy that supports the integration afterwards.
Mm.
Um, and so then my clients will come meet with me the next day, 2 days later, and we talk about what's coming up, what's shifting. We try to make use of that neuroplasticity window that ketamine offers. Um, and so then there's ongoing psychotherapy along with the ketamine. So the protocol that I use, usually, what research finds is about 6 to 8 ketamine sessions spread out over about 4 to 5 months really allows the formation of new pathways. And then with the supportive therapy, after that amount of time, those things are more solidified and become more of a natural way of being and thinking and doing.
Mm.
And so the majority of my clients will do the 6 to 8 ketamine protocol treatment. And sometimes then ongoing kind of booster sessions once a month or once every 3 or 4 months to kind of um, clients will kind of reorient themselves around um, some of the new pathways they had learned that may they feel like, oh, I'm going through a tough patch right now, and I'm not having access to some of those things that I know to be true when that I created for myself. And so sometimes the ketamine can kind of allow a reorientation to some of that.
Mm. And is there anyone that it's not recommended for?
There's definitely some counter indications with medication or with um, some psychoses, but for the most part, ketamine is it's a safe drug in the sense that it can be taken with many medications. There's some psychedelics that I worked with MDMA in a clinical trial
Mm.
setting before. So in comparing it to MDMA, when there was definitely medications that a participant in our clinical trials would need to be weaned off of in order to take ketamine. Ketamine's got a profile that is often can be taken with other things, um, and side effects are minimal.
And as we were talking, I noticed that you touched on kind of these topics that a lot of people struggle with, loneliness, and finding love in their lives. And I'm just curious, if someone is going through a hard time and, especially if they're seeking therapeutic support or whether it's ketamine assisted or, sitting with someone, what's a good way, first of all, to find a good practitioner, and then also how do they what are some tips for talking with their families or finding other support around them?
It does. Well, I think community is really important, especially when we're doing our own, when we're struggling or we're feeling like we're doing our own work, being in community with others that understand. So that could be family, friends, or seeking out others that feel can relate. Um, but that can also be finding a therapist that can support. And I think that's a very individualistic thing. Um, what I would say about that is, when seeking out a therapist, most therapists will offer a free 15-minute consultation to be able to talk with them. Finding somebody that feels like a good fit for you, that feels like they can hear you, they understand, I think is really an important key to being able to dive in and do some of our own personal work.
Mm.
So finding someone that's a good fit is important.
Right, and remembering that it's that person's choice to interview as many people as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you have anything to offer as far as having ketamine or even non-ketamine assisted therapy online versus in person, and how that's um, shaped the experience of your clients and for you as a therapist?
Yeah. And so I offer my ketamine assisted therapy both remote online and in person. Um, and for some clients, it feels the in person is important. They like to feel kind of the safety of the space. Um, either kind of session, I it's fully supported. So even those that are remote or online, I'm with that person on Zoom the whole time. Um, and so for some clients that I see, they really like the in person. For some clients, in person isn't a possibility. They live too far away. And so our relationship is fully virtual. And then I've had some clients who do both. And what they were able to say is they really liked the coming in person and feeling the safety of the space. And, before we do a ketamine session, I've already worked with a client, 3 or 4 or 5 sessions, sometimes longer. So we've built a relationship and a strong understanding of what the client's working on and the container I'm holding for them. And so I've had some clients who've been in person and then also prefer being at home, because what that looks like is then after our session's over and we've been able to process a little bit, then the client is just home and sometimes they'll just lay back and just have a quiet rest of, their afternoon or their evening. They don't need to go out into the world, where my clients who are in person do need someone to come pick them up and they have to go out into the world and get back home and reorient themselves. So I feel like there's positives to actually both experiences. And I feel like both clients feel supported in both settings. It's almost like what makes the most sense for them. Like I say, I have some clients who are hours away or longer, and so in person doesn't make sense. So
Mhm.
virtual feels very supportive and connecting.
And
Yeah,
do you have some resources for people who would want to educate themselves more about ketamine assisted therapy and maybe how to talk to their families about it?
yeah. I have some information on my website.
Okay,
You
great.
can
We'll
link.
share that. Yeah.
And information about what it is and how it impacts, who it's a good fit for. Um, and often, my recommendation, if a client was thinking about it, is to really have a consult with somebody, a therapist who provides it. Now, ketamine is also provided intravenously. That's
Mm.
a very common, where one would go into a medical clinic and get the ketamine. Often those aren't supported with the therapy.
Mm.
Um, so of course, clients need to decide for themselves what path they want to take. I'm a strong proponent of the psychotherapy component of the psychedelic uh, experience, just because so much tends to come up for clients. I actually am working with some clients who had been getting ketamine intravenously and didn't feel the support and felt like there was all these, almost what we were talking about before, like shadow parts that were coming up and they didn't know what to do with them. And so then we're seeking out somebody who could provide the therapy associated with it. So that's just kind of my own personal take, is that the therapy component is really important when undergoing kind of the deep work of, psychedelic therapy healing.
Mm. Well, it's beautiful offerings. And I just wanted to again circle back to your training. You're a licensed social worker, and you and I completed the Barbara Brennan School of Healing for your program together. And is there anything else that you want to share about yourself and your practice? And before we wrap up.
Yeah, I feel like, my work that I do now has been informed by, yeah, I've been a licensed clinical social worker for over 20 years, so working with clients in different ways over that time. And then my energy work is definitely just brings a whole different dimension to my work, and the presence and um, and almost just my approach and how I hold clients in their healing journey and the container that we're working in together as like therapist and client. I worked extensively with the clinical trials looking at MDMA assisted therapy. And so that's where my love for psychedelic therapy began, when I could see some amazing healing journeys from persons who had treatment resistant PTSD that had been debilitating in some cases for decades. And then to see the healing that could take place when um, under the right circumstances. And so I kind of fell in love with the work that way, knowing that there was other healing paths for people who are really struggling. And so then after my work with MDMA and the clinical trials, um, where I worked supporting the therapists and providing that therapy, um, I decided that I wanted to be able to offer that kind of what I consider like kind of a gold level, gold standard of holding the psychedelic treatment work, really with therapy and support, proper preparation and integration sessions. And so that's what I'm doing now is in my private practice. I offer regular counseling, also ketamine assisted therapy, um, and energy work for those who feel like that would be helpful.
Hmm. May I ask if you've experimented with ketamine therapy yourself?
I have. Yeah. Yeah.
And have you had obviously had good results?
Good results. Yeah. Yeah. Just yeah, some openings to things that felt were harder to like open on my own, if you will, almost like new thoughts, new ways of being, new perspectives is what I found that were almost more easily to gravitate towards, or they were like available.
Mm.
Where in some regards, sometimes that felt like a um, kind of forcing to kind of find a new way of looking at things where the ketamine just kind of allowed things to open. It's like, oh, there it is. It was like gentle, like, oh, it almost felt like, oh, that perspective was there all the time. I just didn't see it. And there it is.
And that leads to real life changes. Yes.
The real life changes. Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for being here today, Shannon.
Yeah. Thank you. This is great being able to talk with you.
Yeah, wonderful. I feel like we could go, a lot deeper into psychedelics and all the experiences you've had because you worked for a long time with an organization and how energy work relates to that. So maybe we'll pick this up again and have a round about that. All
Sounds great.
right. Thank you so much.
Easy. Bye bye.
All right. Bye bye. So Nosrat, we're all finished. I don't. He said.